I learned that virtually any kid who has been written off, virtually any kid who has that thick cume folder full of failure, has an ability and a potential that we simply don't see.
Join us as Mike Rose talks about lives on the boundary. I'm Bill Moyer.
Do you remember some of those kids you taught 20 years ago when you were in the teacher corps, kids like Dora and Jesus?
Yeah, I do. And
what did they teach you?
Yeah, good question. It's one that's rarely asked.
You had to learn from them.
Did I ever learn from them? I learned that virtually any kid who has been written off, virtually any kid who has that thick cume folder full of failure, has an ability and a potential that we simply don't see. And what I found again and again was that they just had all this ability, the ability to tell stories and write them, the ability to talk to each other about the reading they did and create interesting kinds of connections between the readings. They had an ability to get very excited about language use in a way you could have never predicted from what the objective tests said and what the records in their cumulative folders said. These are people who had, now admittedly they had just come out of a kind of experience that sort of slapped them around in a horrible way. But what was striking is that virtually to a person, these guys were curious. They wanted to know how to do things with language. They knew damn well that to be able to do things with language or with mathematics was going to enable them to improve their life. You cannot write these folks off as being in some way incompetent, incapable, damaged, deficient. It's that they never had the right kinds of opportunities, the right chances.
Is this what you mean when you say that poor performance in education is more often, in your experience, a social failure instead of an intellectual failure?
So often we assume that miserable test scores or a failed performance of some kind, you know, the stunted piece of writing that we always see tossed before us in our national magazines as evidence of our, cultural demise, the low reading scores, the dropout and truancy rates. We see all this as evidence of some sort of often we see it as some sort of evidence of an intellectual failure. These people are not capable, they're not cognitively capable, they don't have the intellectual or linguistic facility to conduct these kinds of tasks and to comport themselves in the school system.
But there is this continuing tendency in our society to look upon the poor as somehow different. And I don't mean just different in having less money.
Right.
Different in terms
That's
of
right.
soul or mind or
That's
recesses of spirit.
That's right.
We do tend to put them in that polarity.
Yeah, we really do. And it goes way back in our country. When you read reports from 19th century educators about teaching the urban poor, there the whole discussion is cast again and again in terms of almost moral, spiritual, and characterologic terms. Virtually calling the children of the poor barbarians, virtually calling them without a soul, virtually calling them without character or with flawed character. As we moved into our own time, that sort of moralistic cast has tended to diminish a bit. But instead what we do now is we zero in to the little loops and contours of their mind or the language they use, and we find here, we assume we're finding these very fundamental deficiencies that makes them different from us. Not just different because they have less money, but different in intellectual capacity, different in character, different in ability to use language.
Seems to me that one of the first purposes of education is to open our eyes to our own worth and our own capacity to change our lives, or at least to understand the lives of others.
If we really mean that in our educational system, then we have to truly think of ways, rigorous ways, to bring people into that encounter who traditionally have not been brought into it.
Do you think there will be a place in this economy for all these people you would like to, whose potential you would like to tap, whom you would like to turn on to the joys and power of reading and writing?
I can say that I don't see that we have any choice but to figure out how to invite more people from the poor and disenfranchised groups in this country. We don't have any choice but to figure out how to bring them in to our society. The presence of such a huge number of people who are so disenfranchised runs counter to the story, to the best story that this country tells itself about itself. It does not speak of equality. It does not speak of a country that is an open society with an open educational system. And I think unless we do something, the falseness of that story will slap us very hard in the face. I think we're headed for troubled times in the society unless we do something to help more people enter into the educational system in a more productive and powerful way.
You just used that word again, invite.
Yeah, I did, didn't I?
That's education.
To me.